Good morning, Year 11. I have to be honest with you, you guys only get 1 hour of remote learning because you're back in school with us tomorrow. So what we're hoping to do in this lesson is just to create a bridge lesson between Year 10 English Literature, which was our main focus, to Year 11, the focus on English language. So just as a subject overview to remind you then, we made a distinction right back at the beginning of Year 10 that you take 2 exams, an English language exams, there's 2 of them, a paper 1 and a paper 2, and English literature exams, 2 papers. Now, you might see things in the news, you might be media literate, your parents might be looking into this because they're concerned. We are still waiting for confirmation as to what the exams will look like this year, whether there will be 2 English language papers or whether there will be 2 English literature papers, but we do know that you will be examined in some way at the end of Year 11. So we move forward, we continue to progress until we have confirmation otherwise that you will do 2 English language papers. So you will do a paper 1 where you read different types of fiction text and answer questions, and paper 2 where you're looking at non-fiction text and answering questions. In both papers, you'll have to produce your own writing. So in paper 1, where you've read and responded to a fiction text, you will do a creative written response. And in paper 2, where you read and respond to non-fiction text, you will do what we call an example of transactional writing. You might do a written speech just like you've done at the end of Year 10. So this is really the focus for Year 11. But the English literature content doesn't disappear. So you did amazing work considering the really difficult circumstances of being in and out during Year 10, and you have read and completed a study of Blood Brothers, A Christmas Carol, Macbeth, and an anthology of poetry. So you have done an incredible amount of work. All of that comes under the exams, the English literature exams. So really Year 11 is about creating that bridge across to English language and what we're going to ask you to do there. Now, before we look at what we're asking you to do for Year 11, we're just going to have a quick recap. Now, we're going to use this key concept of justice and social injustice to create a little bit of bridge. So, in other words, all the literature texts from Year 10 could be linked in some way to big questions around justice and social injustice. In other words, Macbeth, Christmas Carol, Blood Brothers, the poems in some way position us to look at society and how we fit in society, how we as humans work within society, in terms of how often we get it wrong. In other words, how often society makes mistakes and we end up treating people unfairly. There's issues of inequality and discrimination and the suffering that this causes. So guys, just to think about these key ideas, and at this point you've just been listening, but these would be some really good key terms to write down so that we can have a bank of these ideas moving forward. So all of the literature texts from Year 10 in some way get us to think about this idea of justice. Now, justice itself is the quality of being just, a sense of fairness within society, a sense of demand, expectation that people should get what they deserve. Now, whether we call that, that definition of justice there is, when we look at our society, we could already begin to see that there is a lack of justice in society, that actually people don't always get what they deserve. Some people get maybe more than we think they deserve or less than what they deserve. Some people aren't treated fairly, and we see huge examples in our society of unfairness, of inequality, discrimination, of people not being treated in the right way. Now, when we talk about being just then, it's this idea that we look and expect people to behave according to what is right and fair. We expect people to do the right thing, don't we? We expect people to be fair. In a classroom, you expect to be treated fairly and rightly by your teacher. Similarly, your teacher has expectations that you will do what is right and fair. So across all of the texts from Year 10, there was this exploration, this questioning about what was right and fair. Were the people, the characters, getting what they deserved? Was there a sense of fairness in the world in which they lived? Now, we know, without even reminding ourselves too much of those texts, and actually, sadly, all of them are questioning why justice and behaving in a just way, a way that is right and fair, is so hard to achieve in society. Across all our texts, actually, they are looking at the impact of what we might call social injustice. So all the texts we've looked at, Macbeth, A Christmas Carol, Blood Brothers, the poems, are really looking at people or groups of people within society who in some way either treated unfairly or treat others unfairly. We're looking at characters across the plays that do not always get what they deserve. Or we have to see the outworking of the story and decide for ourselves, do they get what they deserve? We see across our text issues of discrimination, issues of inequality, issues where people are treated unfairly, where people are discriminated against because of things beyond their control. And we're shown across Blood Brothers, A Christmas Carol, all of our key texts that actually within society, there are certain parts of society such as the law, the education system, the government, that may even carry out unfair practices and behaviours that perpetuate injustice. So rather than the government and police and teachers sorting out the problem and solving it, sometimes they end up contributing to the problem. And so all of our key texts really could be seen as exploring why we find it so hard as a group of people in our humanity to get it right, to treat people in the way that they deserve, to be kind and compassionate, to do the right thing. And instead, we see evidence upon evidence upon evidence of us getting it wrong, of people being discriminated against and treated unfairly. So across all our texts, we see this. We see people, individuals, groups of people being treated unfairly and in a way that we would say is morally wrong, and the suffering that it causes. So we could say that a key concept of justice and social injustice is being explored from Shakespeare's Macbeth all the way to the poetry about power and conflict, that it's unfair that some people have more power than others, that it's unfair that soldiers were left to die and fight in terrible conditions and circumstances. So guys, at this point, I'm happy for you to pause and just to write down those key terms. Definitely we want to get down justice and social injustice. Really the additional terms of just kind of just help us unpack that idea a little bit. So just pause there and write down justice and social injustice. These are key ideas for us that are going to create a bridge from year 10 into year 11. Right, guys, so hopefully you've written those down. And just as thinking back to year 10, okay, we're just going to do a quick game, a quick quiz, okay, to think about how our key text, Macbeth, The Christmas Carol, Blood Brothers, Power and Conflict, in some way represents social injustice. Now, guys, you're going to see a sentence summary, and you've just got to make a quick decision. Does that sentence go with Macbeth, Christmas Carol, Blood Brothers, Power and Conflict? Now, if you can make the decision quickly, that shows a good memory, a good link back to year 10. If not, you can pause and have a time to think about it. So, which of these 4 texts is about a man who's motivated by fear and he idealizes money and consequently neglects the poor and needy in society? 1, 2, 3, which text? So just say it out loud, think out loud. You can write it down if you really want, but which one does that one go with? Brilliant. Now, which of our texts, this could be a bit easier, is a series of poems, many of which span several wars, that expose the unfair treatment of soldiers. So there's great sense of social injustice around the treatment of soldiers. Which texts would you match that summary to? Okay, which text represents a man who's corrupted by ambition and that leads him to treat others unfairly and in a way that is morally wrong? So much so that he murders an innocent king. Which one's that? Okay, and last but not least, which of our texts represents a brother separated from his twin at birth who is treated unfairly because he is poor? Right, guys, this is just real quick. So we're going to look at the answers together. So hopefully you've kind of made a quick, yep, that one goes there, that one goes there. So guys, what is the answer? So, A Christmas Carol, did you get it? It's a man, Ebenezer Scrooge, motivated by fear. I love it. Belle says, Ebenezer, you fear the world too much. Another idol has displaced me. So in A Christmas Carol, we have an exploration of social injustice. And actually we see that Ebenezer Scrooge, motivated by fear, idealizes money, and that leads him to treat others unfairly. It leads him to behave in a way that we could say is morally wrong. So he neglects the poor and needy in society. He chooses not to help those in need. But as beautifully done by Dickens, this is a redemptive narrative, isn't it? So by the end of A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge learns to love, and that love replaces fear. He no longer idealizes money by the end of the novel, but he learns to favor or to prioritize relationships. And rather than neglect the poor and needy in society, by the end of it, he's as good as man, a good a friend, a good a citizen as the good old city ever had. So he gets redeemed. Brilliant. Now, power and conflict, really, I just grouped the war poems here and suggest that they do expose social injustice around the treatment of soldiers. So Remains is an exposure of PTSD and the unfair way in which soldiers were damaged by their experiences in war zones and left to kind of fend for themselves. Wilfred Owen, as a soldier who died on the front lines, but spent his time before he died wanting to give a voice to expose the unfair treatment of soldiers. Macbeth. Now, in many ways, Macbeth is the agent of social injustice. It is Macbeth who, because he is corrupted by ambition, begins to behave in a way that is so morally wrong that it leads to the murder of many innocent people. Banquo, King Duncan, the Macduff family. So in a way, he represents the suffering caused by social injustice, by this inability to do what is right. And we could argue that that's motivated because he wants something so badly, even though he isn't patient enough to see if he really gets to deserve it. He wants that kingdom, doesn't he? Brilliant. And last but not least, our beautiful blood brothers, where our brother Mickey, separated from Edward at birth, consistently comes against unfair treatment because of his poverty, because he is poor, because his family are economically deprived, because they are working class. They come consistently against that barrier of inequality and unfair treatment. So guys, hopefully that was just a little bit of recap into our year 10 and what a year you've had. You've covered all of that in 1 year, guys. You've been amazing. Now, just before we start to think about language, this doesn't go away. At the end of year 11, you will do your literature exams. So we support with revision sometimes through retrieval tasks, where we will signpost explicitly in lessons, opportunities to revise. However, there is an element of autonomy. In other words, you've got to take a bit of responsibility. How can you be revising and making sure that these texts remain in your memory banks, that they don't just suddenly disappear? So there will be things that we do in class to support you and direct you to revision and ways to secure your knowledge and understanding of these texts. But it's that little disclaimer, although we're beginning the language paper work this year, these 4 texts are really important that they don't magically disappear. Okay, so we focus primarily now on the rest of the term on English language paper 1. Now, I don't want to scare you too much, but you will do a mock. So you will do an exam under exam conditions on English language paper 1. So we will immediately be using this as an assessment point. We also know, because guys, we have learnt too over the past year, that if suddenly, for whatever reasons, we had to abandon the exam season again, teachers assess grades. That's what we've done this year. So our current year 11s got teacher assessed grades. Now, in order to give you a grade, your teacher will need evidence to prove the grade that they're going to give you. So it's not a relational, I really like that student, so I'm going to give them a 6. Every grade that we give you has to be evidenced. So it is really important that every assessment point becomes in your head a moment where you say, wait a minute, this could be what my teacher ends up using to give me my grade. So every assessment actually has real tangible value that it could be used to give you your grade. So everything we do, yet we want you to have fun, we want you to enjoy English, but has this serious weight to it now, because we know if we go back to teacher assessed grades, whatever evidence we have for you is where your grade comes from. Okay, so anyway, but we don't want to get too serious, do we? So we're going to think about social injustice to bridge across to year 11. So we've said that social injustice is this theme, this idea that actually comes across 4 texts already. So we call it a reoccurring motif, an idea. And it links to what we call a bigger bank of universal themes and ideas that many writers explore and return to. So if you look at 1,000 books, 1,000 poems that have been produced over the past 100, 200, 300, 400 years, this theme of social injustice reoccurs. It comes up time and time again because we haven't answered it yet. We still live in a society in 2021 that doesn't get it right. People are still treated unfairly. There are issues around discrimination and inequality. So lovely writers, thinkers come back to this over and over again. So in language paper 1, you will be asked to read and understand an extract from a literature text you've never seen before. It's not a whole novel, it's not a whole play, but it's an extract from what we call a literature text. So it may well explore the motif of social injustice or any of its linked ideas. So when we've looked across all of our texts, you might have very well something that comes up in paper 1 that links to social injustice or poverty. It might take us back to the class divide, to inequality. It might in some way deal with the issue of power and how power can be misused. It might be a text that talks about discrimination or presents us with an image of a character suffering. It might deal with elitism or ambition or corruption. Now, it may. So we can never tell you what the text of language paper 1 is going to be. Each year the exam board chooses it. But across the text that we study this year in preparing for language paper 1, we will draw attention to these reoccurring motifs. Okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to look at an extract together and we're going to do some quick language-based work around it. All right, my lovely? So this is what we're going to do today. So we're going to read this extract together. In other words, I'm going to read it to you, or you can mute me, and read it to yourself. Okay, so let's have a look at this together. Although Oliver had enough to occupy his attention in keeping sight of his leader, he could not help bestowing a few hasty glances on either side of the way as he passed along. A dirtier or more wretched place he had never seen. The street was very narrow and muddy, and the air was impregnated with filthy odours. There were many good small shops, but the only stock in trade appeared to be heaps of children who even at that time of night were crawling in and out at the doors or screaming from the inside. The sole places that seemed to prosper amid the general blight of this place were the public houses, and in them the lowest orders of Irish were wrangling with might and main. Covered ways and yards which here and there diverged from the main street disclosed little knots of houses where drunken men and women were positively wallowing in filth, and from several of the doorways great ill-looking fellows were cautiously emerging, bound, to all appearance, on no very well disposed or harmless errands. Now, guys, I've chosen an extract that mirrors what they do in the exam. The extracts tend to come from the 19th century. So they're a bit more old-fashioned, so some of the language is a bit more archaic, a bit more challenging. You've got to remember the exam is designed to help grade 9 students get a grade 9 and grade 3, grade 2 students achieve an outcome. But they will always give you challenging texts. So let's just have a little look at how we can begin to work through this text together. So we've read it for the first time. Now I'm going to read it again, and this time you can either write down on a page, or you can write down or make a note of it or highlight it if you're doing this on text then, any words or phrases that help us begin to think about who is being treated badly, unfairly, and maybe in a way they don't deserve. So we're going to use the theme of social injustice now to help us read this text again. So who? So in other words, can we identify any people, groups of people, individuals, and we get a sense that they're being treated badly, unfairly, and in a way they don't deserve? So as I go through, you can write down your impressions. Okay, so we're just thinking out loud on paper. Who is being treated unfairly, badly, and in a way they don't deserve? So although Oliver had enough to occupy his attention in keeping sight of his leader, he could not help bestowing a few hasty glances on either side of the way as he passed along. So we're immediately given a who. We've got this character introduced by name, Oliver. Now, it says that Oliver had enough to occupy his attention in keeping sight of his leader. So what could that mean? So he's got to keep attention, keeping sight of his leader. So we've got this character, Oliver, who's following a leader. He's got to keep him in his sights. But that doesn't mean at this stage that there's any proof here that Oliver is being treated badly or unfairly or in a way he doesn't deserve. So we can argue, okay, we've got a who, but they're not being treated badly. Okay, so this he, okay, is referring back to Oliver. So we've got that pronoun he replacing Oliver. So although Oliver had enough to occupy his attention in keeping sight of his leader, so Oliver is fixated on the person in front of him. Why? Doesn't maybe want to get lost. He's never been here before. But he could not help bestowing a few hasty glances on either side of the way. So imagine this. You've got this character, Oliver. There's somebody in front of him that he's following, but at the same time, he can't help it. He can't help but quickly look, those hasty glances, either side as he's walking along. So we've got a character, Oliver, following a leader, and he can't help but looking around him, looking at what's going on around him. But he's not necessarily been mistreated yet or treated badly. Okay, so what's distracting him? A dirtier or more wretched place he had never seen. So who's our he? Good. So Oliver's never seen a place so dirty or wretched and squalid as this. The street was very narrow and muddy, and the air was impregnated with filthy odours. So although this is a lovely sentence, this one, with these delicious kind of like powerful adjectives, narrow, muddy, okay, filthy, it's not telling us about people. So it's not telling us about people. So we don't need this sentence to answer our question, who's being treated badly. But this word impregnated as well means that the air is infused with filthy odours. So you never will lose this smell. There were a good many small shops. Okay, so we know that this street is filthy. We know that it smells bad, that it's narrow and muddy. And we now know it's got small shops on it. But it's not telling us who. Remember, that's our focus. We are thinking about who is being treated badly, unfairly, and in a way they don't deserve. But, so we get this lovely, so this is where we are, but, a little change in focus. The only stock in trade appeared to be the heaps of children, who even at that time of night were crawling in and out of doors or screaming from the inside. Now, how are these children being presented? Do we think we're getting a sense that these children are treated well? That they're treated fairly, or are we getting a sense that they're treated in a way they don't deserve? This could be an answer to our question. Okay, now again, this interesting phrase, stock in trade. Now stock, if you ever worked in a shop or your family or you know shop talk, stock, stock is what is being sold. So that's an interesting phrase, isn't it? So the only stock in trade, the only thing that seems to be being sold or up for sale were children. So that might make us think, whoa, that's quite serious. That could be something no child deserves to be sold. If you're selling children, maybe we're being treated badly. Okay, the sole places, old-fashioned sole, they're the only places that seem to prosper. Amid the general blight of this place were the public houses. Now, guys, pubs. Yep, pubs. We know pubs. We've got pubs in Plymouth, pubs in Tor Point. Pubs is a shortening of public houses. So the only places that seem to prosper, that seem to be doing well in this filthy, narrow, muddy, awful place with these children are the pubs. So the pubs are doing well. And in them, the lowest orders of Irish were wrangling with might and main. So in the pubs, the only places that are doing well, the only places that are making money, the only places where people are going to spend their money are the pubs. And it makes a reference here to a group of people in the pubs, the Irish, who are wrangling and fighting with might and main. In other words, they're getting drunk and they're fighting and proving their strength and having a good old brawl. But do the Irish then, does that make us seem that they're being treated badly or in a way they don't deserve? So we know maybe Oliver isn't the answer to this question yet of who's being treated badly. Is it the Irish? Is it the children? What impression are we getting? Covered ways and yards, which here and there diverge from the main street, disclose little knots of houses. So we've got this lovely panoramic kind of, we start with the big picture, now we're zooming in. So we've described the children, the pubs, and now it's saying off this main street, diverge little streets, knots of houses, where drunken men and women were positively wallowing in filth. Yep, we often talk about pigs that wallow in filth. So we've got drunken men and women wallowing in filth. Now, are this the group? Is this the group that we would answer that say are being treated badly and unfairly and in a way they don't deserve? Or actually are they choosing to drink? And from several of the doorways, great ill-looking fellows were cautiously emerging, bound to all appearance on no very well disposed or harmless errands. So there's lovely kind of multiple negatives here, but basically then we end with some great big men, ill-looking fellows. So they look rough, they look mean, and they're coming out of their houses, they're looking about them, they're being cautious as they go off on no harmless errands. So they're up to no good, so maybe they're going off to steal. So this is a beautifully rich description, but I want you to answer this question then. So out of all the groups of people that are mentioned, who do you think are the groups? So what can you remember? So you've got to write down the names of the groups. And then from those groups of people, who is being treated badly and unfairly in the way they don't deserve? So if you had to choose one group, who is the group here that you think really strikes you as being treated badly? So just a quick think on paper. Which groups have we mentioned? I'm going to give you about 10 seconds. Ready? So 10 seconds to scan back. You've been listening to me. Which groups have we got? Individual people or groups? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds. So who were the groups that were mentioned? Let's just give them a tick. Good. You've got Oliver, his leader, maybe. You've got the Irish. You've got the children. You've got the ill-looking fellows. You've got the drunk men and women. Quite a kind of cacophony, a group of all these people. Now, guys, out of those people, Oliver, the leader, the Irish, the ill-looking fellows, the drunken men and women, and the children. Who does your gut tell you is the group here that's being treated badly, unfairly, in a way they don't deserve? Choose one. 3, 2, 1. Your group is? Did you get it? Yes. Hopefully you got that it's the children in this section that seem to be the ones that are being treated badly and unfairly. So that's the answer. Yep. Which group are being treated unfairly? But what becomes a key aspect of of GCSE language is the ability then to zoom in on the words or phrases that describe the group and to begin to think about how those words and phrases reveal that the children are being badly treated. So guys, again, this time I'm going to do a 15-second countdown, but I want you to write down. So you've written down children for our group that are being treated badly. Now I want you to record 3 words or phrases from this zoomed in sentence that are going to prove that we think they're being badly treated or that they're being mistreated. Okay, so 3 words or phrases. So there were a good many small shops, but the only stock in trade, remember what I said that meant? What did stock in trade mean? Something that's up for good, something that's up for sale. So we could choose that one. But the only stock in trade appeared to be heaps of children who even at that time of night were crawling in and out of the doors or screaming from the inside. So 15 seconds to write down 3 words or phrases that are going to help us prove that these children are being badly treated. 1, 2, 3. 15. Brilliant. So hopefully, let's see. So if you've got the following words or phrases, give yourself a tick. Now, good. Did you get down? Because we're going to talk about these in a minute, but crawling, screaming. This interesting phrase, even at that time of night. So it suggests, even at that time of night, that this is wrong, that the children are up this late. This lovely word that we talked about a little bit, but heaps of children, and the fact that they're only stock in trade. Now, so we've got those, but we're going to do something, an interim step, okay, and then we're going to turn it into some sentences, and then we are done for today. So we're going to think about this question: how do these words and phrases reveal that the children are being badly treated? Now, this is where English language is a bit different to literature, because you need to be able to explain, comment on, and analyse how writers use language and structure to achieve effects and influence readers, using relevant subject terminology to support their views. Now, that is exactly lifted from the exam objectives. So for us, we're going to put it into our in other words. So in other words, across year 11, you're going to need to grow and cultivate a good knowledge about language. You need to understand how language works and to be able to examine it close up. You need to grow and cultivate the ability to think about why language is used in certain ways and how it might affect you, how it might affect me in different ways. Now, guys, the lovely double whammy of this is that this will then mean when we revise literature and we're revising a key quote from Macbeth or a key quote from Blood Brothers, you will have a new layer of knowledge to enable you to say something really clever, really deep about how language works. Now, this is just an intro lesson. We know that over the next term, we're going to focus on this. So I'm just going to ask you some quick questions, okay? So, and it's going to help us work and think about language in terms of verbs, adjectives, noun phrases, etc. Now, these are all areas of language that we will cover in coming lessons. These are the list of language features that the exam board says it's really good for you to know. So we are going to work on understanding and revising verbs, adverbs, adjectives, noun phrases, metaphors, simile, the senses, personification, listing and repetition. But for today, I'm going to give you some quick questions. Are you ready? So here's our sentence. There are a good many small shops, but the only stock in trade appeared to be the heaps of children who even at that time of night were crawling in and out of the doors, screaming from the inside. Now, Guy, which colour phrase tells you when something is happening? So let's look. We've got the green phrases, the blue phrase, the purple phrase, or the yellow phrase. So use your own skills now. Looking in those phrases, which colour phrase tells you when something is happening? So just decide, write down your answer. Now, an adverb or an adverbial phrase does other jobs, but it can tell you when something happens. Okay, adverbs add information to the verbs. They modify verbs. They tell us how something is done, when something is done, the manner in which something is done. You might remember from Key Stage 2, you might have been told that adverbs end in ly. And they do. They tell us how something was done. She ran quickly. But they can also tell you when something is happening. So guys, which colour phrase tells us when something was happening? Good. That blue phrase, even at that time of night. So the use of the adverb, even at that time of night, helps us to imagine that these children are so neglected and mistreated that they are out on the streets very late. When other children that are maybe treated better, that get treated in the right way, might be tucked up in bed, these children are out at night. Okay, guys. Now, which colour phrases then are telling us what the children are doing? Now, this might have two colours. So it says what colour phrase or phrases, or what colours are telling us what the children are doing. Now, these are our verbs. Now, verbs, again, we're going to expand on this, but often end in ing, just giving you a clue, and they tell you what somebody is doing. So what are these children doing? What colours did you get? Good, purple and yellow. So our children are crawling and screaming. Now, guys, if we're thinking about social injustice, people being treated badly, being treated in a way that is not right, that is morally wrong, that is unfair. These verbs are really powerful in helping us to imagine, to visualize that something is not right for these children. They are crawling and screaming, okay? And if we begin to add that with the at night, so we're beginning to build this image, okay, that even at night, so it's late, it's so late, and yet we've got children crawling in and out of the doors and screaming from the inside. Okay, lovely. Now, which colour phrase? Describe the children as if they are something else. Now, you could argue we've only got one left. So this is quick in the sense that we could only say green. Now, this is important. These are metaphors. Now, metaphors actually are much more common than we realise, but sometimes a little bit harder to spot. There's what we call obvious metaphors and hidden metaphors. Now, our first metaphor, only stock in trade. So the children are being described here as stock in trade. And if you remember what I said, stock in trade means what's up for sale. So how do we know these children are being badly treated? Because the metaphor stock in trade presents the children as if they're a commodity, as if they're something to be sold and bought, as if they're only worth what people pay for them. Makes us imagine that these children are up for sale, which is really sad. Now, actually, heaps of children. Now, a heap is not a child. So actually, this is what we call a more discrete metaphor, because the children here are being presented as if they are a heap. Now, a heap is a great big mound of something. If you're good at opening up a second screen, you can always Google these words if you want a more particular definition or specific. But heap, remember, we start to see with a heap a mound of something. So we get like this image of the children being just laid on top of each other, crawling all on top of each other, as if they're just like discarded. They're just left out on the way to be sold or bought by whoever happens to be passing by. So actually, all of these begin to help us prove that, yes, these children's lives are, these children are being treated unfairly. Children should be innocent, should be protected, should be taken care of. And yet here we see a sense of social injustice around how these children are being treated. So guys, last but not least then, so this is the work that we do. We begin to build confidence in being able to look at language and think about how it works. We begin confidence in labeling language, adverb, verbs, metaphors. And then we do have to do that final stage, which is turning ideas into a written response. In other words, what, how, or why. So what you can see here is I've got two sentences or a group of sentences that have turned our ideas and our discussion here into a response. Okay, to the bigger question, we go all the way back here. How do these words and phrases reveal that the children are being badly treated? So all I want you to do to end with is to give me two sentences of your own. So we're going to look at mine together in a minute, that just in your own words explain how the language is helping you understand or visualize or imagine these children being treated unfairly. Okay, so let's have a look then. So these are just some nice academic phrases when we begin to think about language. When I imagine or visualize X like Y, it makes me think that. Despite being, X is described using Y because. So let's have a look at that in practice. So when I imagine the children like a heap, so there's my chosen example. I've gone for the green one. Can you remember what green was? Metaphor. So when I imagine the children like a heap, it makes me think that there are so many of them. They're clumped together and presented as being worthless and discarded. So I've taken the word heap and then I've unpacked what it makes me imagine or think of. Clumped, worthless, discarded. Now, I do love threes. Threes, saying one thing is better than no thing. Saying two things is better than one thing. Three would be enough before you'd need to move on. Now, this is important. We need to get to practice of this. This metaphor. So by using that word metaphor, I'm telling the examiner, I know a bit about language, that this is a metaphor. So this metaphor suggests these children are treated unfairly and are neglected. Now, I could say that that's not perfect. Yeah, I could do another because moment here. This metaphor suggests these children are treated unfairly and neglected because a heap is a mound, it's an object, it's something that's just piled on top of each other and forgotten about. Okay, so I could take that further. So in a minute, you could take the verb crawling and you could say, when I imagine the children crawling, it makes me think that this verb suggests the children are. So in a minute, you're going to do your own sentence and you might choose crawling. Now, here's just to show you a slightly different way of phrasing it. Despite being children who should be treated fairly and protected by society, they are described using the verb screaming because they're suffering and crying out loudly in pain. So then I've got my verb, so I've labelled the language, I've explained there's my screaming, and I've begun to explain or unpack what that means. So guys, your job, so you could take the phrase, you could take the metaphor, stock in trade. You could take the metaphor heaps and do a better job than I have. You could take the adverb, even at that time of night. You could take the verb crawling. You could take the verb screaming. So you're going to now just do two sentences, a when I imagine and a despite being sentence of your own. Now, guys, we do appreciate this is your first lesson back. Do not spend longer than is necessary on this. So if you only get one sentence done, brilliant. It's better to do one sentence than no sentence. But if you get your two, when you meet your teachers later this week, they'll be really pleased. So thank you for listening. Remember, you can look back at the slides if you need to, and we can't wait to work with you this week.